Okay, we're gonna get started here as people trickle in. This is a hybrid event, so there's about 40 people online as well. So they'll see us and the screen, so just so you know that's happening. So welcome everybody. My name is Dr. Laura Nelson. I'm an associate professor in the Department of Sociology at the University of British Columbia. I'm also the director of the Center for Computational Social Science. I want to start by acknowledging that this event is being held at the UBC Vancouver campus, which is located on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Musqueam First Nation. If you are joining this event via Zoom, we would also like to acknowledge that you are joining us today from many places near and far, and acknowledge the traditional owners and caretakers of those lands as well. So welcome to the Politics of Freedom, Generative AI, Racist Technology, and Postcolonial Computing. This is part of the Public Humanities Hub Noted Scholar Lecture Series. The Public Humanities Hub's mandate is to foster and support collaborative humanities research and to highlight and develop public-facing and accountable research in the humanities in the Faculty of Arts, Law, and Education, so an interdisciplinary event. On behalf of the Public Humanities Hub, I would also like to thank the co-sponsors of today's event, which is the Center for Computational Social Science, the Office of Vice Provost and Associate Vice President, there's a lot of words here, Teaching and Learning, the Office of Associate Vice President, Information Technology, and Chief Information Officer, the Faculty of Arts, the Faculty of Education, the Allard School of Law, the Center for Artificial Intelligence and Decision Making and Action, CIDA, the Institute for Gender, Race, Sexuality, and Social Justice, and the Edith Lando Virtual Learning Center. The term digital colonialisms and its racialized, gendered, social, and political norms are baked into the algorithms that drive AI. This set of enduring problematics provides in the present unique ethical, regulatory, juridical, and conceptual challenges. In today's lecture, Dr. Alex Hanna and Dr. Beth Coleman will explore the politics of freedom, generative AI, racist technology, and post-colonial computing. I will introduce the speakers first in the opposite order in which they're going to speak, and then I will turn the podium over to them. So first, Dr. Alex Hanna, who will speak second, is Director of Research at the Distributed AI Research Institute and has published widely in top-tier venues, sociology venues, including the journals Mobilization, American Behavioral Scientist, and Big Data in Society, and top-tier computer science conferences such as CSCW, FACT, NeurIPS, and NeurIPS. Dr. Hanna is a senior fellow at the Center for Applied Transgender Studies and sits on the advisory board for the Human Rights Data Analysis Group and the Scholars Council for the UCLA Center for Critical Internet Inquiry. You can pre-order her book now, which is co-authored with Dr. Emily Bender, called The AI Con. If you look it up, you'll find the website. Dr. Beth Coleman, who will speak first, is Associate Professor of Data and Cities at the Institute of Communication, Culture, Information, and Technology at the University of Toronto, working in science and technology studies, generative aesthetics, and Black poesis. Her research focuses on smart technology and machine learning, urban data and civic engagement, and generative arts. Dr. Coleman is the inaugural director of the University of Toronto's Black Research Network. She was a 2021 Google Artist and Machines Intelligence Awardee and is a senior visiting researcher with Google Brain and Responsible AI. You can order Dr. Coleman's second edition of her gorgeous, gorgeous book, Reality Was Whatever Happened, Octavia Butler, AI, and Other Possible Worlds. And you really do want the print copy of that book. So please welcome the speakers to the podium.
I have a lot of apparatus for 15 minutes, so bear with me. Okay, that's going, this going. And if I forget to click the slides and I'm talking about something that you're not seeing, just gesture. I want to thank Mary Bryson and Laura Nelson and Heather and the rest of the team involved with getting us here. It really is quite a lovely thing to be able to be in conversation with Alex, and Vancouver's nice. So I want to talk about a couple things. Mary had sent us a title for a talk: Politics of Freedom, Generative AI, Racist Technology and Post-Colonial Computing. And Mary said, will that do? And we were both like, wow, that's a lot. So the way I structured my thinking for the start of this presentation is I actually want to talk about all of those topics. Like those are my topics. So that did we forward? I don't know if I have the power. Oh, wait, no, it's too many. Now you've got, so the background, if you squint, you're like, okay, that's Du Bois's Black Atlantic. And we're thinking about data. We're thinking about data in different ways. And I just thought I'd give you one more Du Bois before we get into thinking about data in different ways. So one of the questions that I'm asking in my work is how to see like a machine. So finding the white dog of neural nets. And my white dog obsession comes from a 2015 paper in Nature from Hinton, LeCun, and Bengio, our godfathers of machine learning AI, where they're talking about the process by which the system differentiates between a wolf and a white dog. And what you have is a lot of technological prowess in terms of at the level of the pixel being able to distinguish from one type of object to the other, and they're quite similar, white Samoyeds and white wolves. One of the points that they make is it's about getting very, very close. It's about seeing the intense detail very close up. It's never about context. You don't zoom out, and part of the brag is we're not seeing the big picture. We're only seeing the very local picture, the small picture. And one of the things that I wonder is, okay, so in saying the machine can see this, and where it's making its benchmarks, yes, it's seeing this 98% of the time, can distinguish between the dog and the wolf. Is there any point at which the machine can make a difference between wolves are wild and dogs are domestic? And the answer is, particularly for this period of time in terms of supervised learning and labeling data, et cetera, the answer is no. That is not one of the conditions of which understanding or recognizing is supported. And I can live with that, but one of the things that I can't live with is if that is the only way in which the world is encoded, if that's the only way that understanding is understood. And I think that is part of the bigger problem in terms of the translation of world into data, and then data processes in turn become the rules of how we understand and see. So one of the projects that I started, I guess around 2022 was Octavia Butler AI and Other Possible Worlds. And I was working with a GAN, a generative adversarial network, and I was able to, it's visual production. And one of the things that I liked about it is the architecture is very open. So you've got one pre-trained system, you've got a set of faces or a set of mountains or a set of trees, and then you put in other information. And what it does is it works hard until it finds, oh, Octavia Butler. So one of the reasons that I want to think with Octavia Butler was Octavia Butler's Xenogenesis series, where what Butler does is talk about what does it mean to build kinship with aliens, and then thinking about what are we doing with artificial intelligence, the kind of closest proxy it could get to is building kinship with alien intelligence or something wild, something other than what we are, and trying to work with the friction and often the violence in Butler's texts around what does it mean to build relations. Building good relations is not always a smooth path in Butler, for those of you who've read Butler. So what I was thinking about is if essentially the GAN was designed as a norming machine, it produces the most mediocre, middle of the road images. They're not real people, but it's still unkind to be like, they're just medium. But it's literally finding the norm of, and part of the small data, big output, fast processing of, this was the first time in terms of machine learning generation that faces were appearing very photorealistic. So that was part of what was going on with the GAN. And I was like, oh, no, of course, I should definitely break that. So what I was thinking about, that's my model on the right, and Rich Sutton's reinforcement model learning on the left. I'm not sure if I'm making a joke or not, but I was very inspired with this idea of, in reinforcement learning, the thing finds its way, or the system finds its way. It's fundamentally, it's designed differently than supervised learning. And the GAN version of generative, it's looking through the new data that's coming in and deciding, is this a tree? Is this a dog? Is this a face? And since that's how it works, I thought, oh, if I put in things that are not at all the thing it's looking for, what will it do? So that was the process by which I was trying to enact a kind of alien encounter. And what I got were the first generation of portraits, which is the Alice series, the second generation, oceanic, and there's also a landscape generation. And here's some of the images from the book. Alice, white dog on the right, Alice Freeman, engineer on the left. So you can hear Du Bois is, I don't know, am I chasing Du Bois or is Du Bois tracking with me? I can't tell. So that's some of those images. That's part of the oceanic series. And they're literally kin. One generation then is the model by which I train the next generation. You can see color, ocean, jellyfish, which is another versioning of how are we making alien relations, because I'm not going to put in tentacle things because it's not hentai, and also it'd be too literal. And some of the thought behind this, and it's not that artworks always need to have thoughts, but I guess maybe mine do, is an idea of a technology of the surround. The surround is a topos, a space outside of the governance of an Enlightenment legacy. In their text, Harney and Moten's The Undercommons, it's the location in which Blackness is unmoored from historical and ontological constraints as the thing that loses and finds itself. And this is adjacent to some thinking I was doing prior to this on racist technology. And it's situating, this is not a subject position, but a critical framework of agential instrumentalization, as I framed in Race as Technology, 2009. And agential instrumentalization, I was trying to come up with a figuration that would be like interesting and compelling and create like a structure for possibility. But we're actually in a period of machine design where what people are making are agents and they're instrumentalizing things. So it's like, is that what I meant? So this brings me to the politics of freedom. And I want to read from Lisa Lowe's text, The Intimacy of Four Continents, to talk about, oh, that's next, to talk about the politics of freedom. So in talking about liberal political economy, so the place where we are, Lowe writes, liberal forms of political economy, culture, government, and history propose a narrative of freedom overcoming enslavement that at once denies colonial slavery, erases the seizure of lands from native peoples, displaces migrations and connections across continents, and internalizes these processes in a national struggle of history and consciousness. The social inequalities of our time are a legacy of these processes through which the human is freed by liberal forms, while other subjects, practices, and geographies are placed at a distance from the human. So Lowe discusses this in terms of the extended period of time of the transatlantic slave trade, but also the arrival of Asians as indentured servants throughout the Americas, and also the displacement of the different indigenous people of the Americas as the context, the conditions of a liberal political economy of freedom. And that mapping is a mapping that persists through where we have arrived with different forms of kind of technological design. So working very quickly, This is a diagram from Fairness and Machine Learning, and it's Baraka's, Hart, and Narayanan's model of this is how a machine learning loop works. You have individuals, and we're going to the right. Here's the state of the world. The state of the world must be turned into something measurable, and then that's data. And then the data is the learning, is the training of the model, and then the model goes back up to the individual, and that's the only place where you really get a back and forth of action and feedback. So this encoding of world as data, it traces these same patterns that Lowe has mapped in terms of the intimacy of four continents. So that, in some ways, is what I'm trying to state in terms of what is the politics of freedom that we are engaged with. The last image from the Fairness book that I want to show is distribution in terms of the circles represent how many people in the US, it's US centric, have those jobs. And then the number at the bottom represents how many of those people are women. And it's to point out that if you have, if you're looking for aerospace engineers and 10% of them are women, and then you want to make a decision or a design around aerospace engineers and you want equitable representation, you only have 10% within your data set of those people being women. So the idea of translating the measured world as data into a system that then is going to represent the world as one-to-one as such, you can see that it's literally not possible in terms of how the world is encoded. Okay. Was there good news? Sure. There's good news. Okay, postcolonial computing. This one I was like, what am I going to show? And postcolonial computing, we start in Paris. Paris AI Action Summit 2 weeks ago. The final document, Statement on Inclusive and Sustainable Artificial Intelligence for People on the Planet. It sounds great. And it was a G7 conference, so most of the countries in the world signed on with the exception of the US and the UK. And my last map shows like where the power relations are or the vitality is in terms of development of AI technologies, and it's US, China, UK, and India. So for them not to sign on, it means essentially we walk out of a summit 2 weeks ago with new geopolitical framings and also the priority of safety is now gone. It is literally taken off the table. In this country, ADA, which was part of a larger act, was dead once Trudeau resigned. So there is no regulation around this technology on the horizon in Canada or in the United States. The EU is the only kind of like Western country. Japan has some, Taiwan has some. So that is, I don't know, a certain kind of post-colonial map, just reminding us in terms of the EU AI Act, there are certain things that are forbidden. But if we do not have international agreements around things that are forbidden will then not be moved forward, it's not as if it just stays in Europe. These things move around. This slide, people are thinking about technical solutions to address different levels of risk. This is a constitutional AI coming from Anthropic, and I'm happy to talk about that in more detail if that is at all interesting to people. And I just want to end with this last map, which is a different kind of map of the world, but you see kind of a map of power in terms of the HI vibrancy tool as mapping where people are located in terms of AI and development. Okay, thank you. I'm going to pass it on to Alex.
Oh, can you hear me? Is it good? Wonderful. Thank you so much. Thank you to Mary, to Laura, to Heather for organizing. Such a pleasure. Thank you to Beth for being an amazing Locketer. I'm so excited to be here and have this conversation. Um, so mostly I'm going to be talking about, I don't have slides, but so I'm terrified. But I'm going, because I have nothing to moor me. But I'm going to turn on my watch so I at least know how long I'm going. So the name of the book is The AI Con, how to fight big tech's hype and create the future we want. And I think that what I really want to bring out in the book, I mean, the book it'll be out in May. What I really want to highlight is something about the politics of generative AI and the way in which risks get spoken about and AI safety and the way in which those risks are racialized and what they obscure. So let's start with an anecdote and how we start the book. So in late 2023, inside the grand halls of the United States Capitol building, then Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer convened a series of AI insight forums around AI. These were intended to provide the Senate with information on how to handle this quote unquote brand new technology. In this particular meeting, there was a group of people there, a group of notables. Already in the room mentioned Yoshua Bengio, one of the quote unquote godfathers who won computer science highest honors for his work on AI, the Turing Award. Jared Kaplan, co-founder of the influential AI startup Anthropic. Alexander Madrai, OpenAI's head of preparedness, and Stuart Russell, a famous AI professor and very influential. So Schumer's beginning the conversation with an unusual prompt. He said, "What is everyone's P doom?" This is written P, open parentheses, doom, close parentheses, and P, hope. So this refers to sort of a popular trope that machines with minds of their own and their own free will perhaps kill us all, intentionally or unintentionally. And estimates in the room went from 0 to 90%. We don't have hard data on it, but we have their statements. Schumer tweeted after, if managed properly, AI promises unimaginable potential, but if left unchecked, AI poses immediate and long-term risks. And those risks have been deemed, quote, existential by those that have a P doom around the high end, risks that if left unchecked would threaten the whole of humankind. But P doom is bizarre and sounds authoritative, but it's a fake metric. But P doom is not tied to any type of reality. But the probability of doom of actually existing socio-technical systems have come very hard for others. So for instance, in January 2020, Robert Williams was arrested in front of his house in front of his two daughters when Detroit police trusted the results of a database search of 49 million photos that matched his driver's license photo to a freeze frame from a surveillance video of a theft committed by someone else 2 years earlier. In February 2023, Portia Woodruff was arrested and detained for 11 hours based on the output of an automated facial recognition system. At the time, Portia was 8 months pregnant and began to experience contractions while in police custody. Both Williams and Portia are Black, and most known false positives for facial recognition tools have involved Black individuals. The probability is quite high that the lives of these people have been altered for the worse. In 2023, the Israeli Defense Forces and Prime Minister Netanyahu's war-driven cabinet leveraged a system, again marketed as AI, in their assault on Gaza, in which tens of thousands of civilians were killed and still more, we don't know, in the first 3 months. In Gaza, the International Committee of the Red Cross and a spokesperson for the United Nations Office both called this hell on earth, and it served the purpose of rapidly escalating the war. In the words of one former officer, the system facilitates a mass assassination factory. Today, as I was preparing the talk, Set 927 magazine released another report of a new chatbot being developed by the IDF, in which it was trained on Palestinian surveillance data, including spoken language. So Unit 8200, which is the IDF's intelligence arm, effectively was developing a system in which people could ask, is this person a known terrorist? And I found this very indicative, where an intelligence source said, quote, AI amplifies power. It allows operations utilizing the data of far more people, enabling population control. This is not just about preventing shooting attacks. I can track human rights activists. I can monitor Palestinian construction in Area C of the West Bank. I have more tools to know what every person in the West Bank is doing. When you hold so much data, you can direct it towards any purpose you choose. So despite what leaders in DC and in the UK or whomever, apparently not in the US and UK anymore, according to what happened in Paris, P2 is the wrong metric and the wrong framing. And so we call this AI hype in the book, and we talk about hype much more. I want to get more onto kind of a second theme of this kind of notion of what is existential risk and what is exacerbating that. And that's specifically around environmental costs. But first, I want to disentangle what AI is, because I think we don't really have these conversations. AI can refer to many different technologies. And generative AI is different from classification systems or automated decision systems. So it's important to understand what kind of object we have. So first off, to put it bluntly, AI is a marketing term. It doesn't refer to a coherent set of technologies. Instead, the phrase artificial intelligence is deployed when people building or selling a particular set of technologies will pretty much profit for it. It wasn't even the terminology of choice until 2012 when Hinton and Krasvinsky and Sutskever released their 2012 AlexNet paper, no relation, and to solve a particular sort of task in image classification, what Beth referred to, the distinguishing between the white dog or the white wolf. That would be an example. Or the one that I typically like to use, chihuahuas and blueberry muffins. So it actually wasn't even the term of choice. Prior to that, AI had been undergoing what is known as an AI winter. So in terms of AI, we have to think about what's being automated. In the first view, it could be decision making, so making classification decisions, who should be the recipient of a public benefit or not. Classification, is this a picture of grandma, or could be used to match people like suspected terrorists in the eyes of the IDF. Recommending something to someone else, like your Spotify algorithm. Transcription or translation, as in the automatic translation of information from one format to the other. And then text and image generation, which I think is what we are typically talking about or thought about when we say AI. AI has become a shorthand for generation tools like ChatGPT or DALL-E. So one of the things that this does is that it lumps all these different technologies together under the label of AI, and it creates the illusion of a unified intelligent technology. If our photo software sharpening tool is imagined to be the same thing as a system that appears to cheerfully answer questions on any topic, then both are perceived as even more intelligent or even magical than each alone. And we're likely to accept automation in other domains, like deciding who gets social benefits or who gets classified as a possible repeat offender. They're all driven by the same intelligence. So this is kind of the dream of artificial general intelligence, that you have things that take from one task to another. It's also what kind of happens, and you're seeing this more lately in this discussion of agents. So for instance, OpenAI recently said that they'd be offering different kind of agent packages. In one of the cases, for $20,000 a month, you could get an agent with PhD level intelligence, which is very flattering to those of us with PhDs, and I wish we got $20,000 a month. Can do it for half price, that's right. So in the latter half of the talk, I want to talk a little bit about this notion of existential risk. Going back to Schumer's office building and talking about the different claims, when asking, we don't know the exact numbers of people there, but I actually want to read you Bengio's quote from this. So of the people in the room, Bengio has gone full existential risk. Like, someone was in the room, he's gone, we gotta stop the rogue AIs. Bengio said there are many reasons AI could end up with undesirable goals. Each of them may put the system in conflict with humanity and give the system a reason to preserve itself despite human attempts to intervene. Bergeon, who is the head of the Machine Intelligence Research Institute, was very alarmist indeed and said that the most likely outcome of developing smarter than human AI prior to solving alignment is human extinction. Present-day AI systems do not pose an existential threat, but there's a significant chance that systems in the near future will, as they become capable of performing increasingly complex multi-step tasks without humans in the loop. Hinton has as well gone to this place, saying that we have no instances in which a being with lesser intelligence controls a being with higher intelligence. And we ask in the book, has he ever had a stomach bug? So these statements are all in a set of end of times tech visions that have been different monikers: P-doom, existential risks, or S-risks, or more recently, critical harm as proposed by California legislation by friend of the tech industry, State Senator Scott Wiener. So all of them see AI development as something that helps humanity in general, but fret that after reaching some tipping point of quote, something of capabilities, sometimes measured in the amount of compute or amount of data or number of parameters, the system can turn on its human handlers and overwhelm them. Strangely enough, despite these visions, nearly all AI doomers think that AI development is a net good. Many of them have built their careers off the theorization, testing, development, and deployment of these systems, such as Hinton and Bengio. They have markedly not complained about the ways in which the business practices around AI have accrued financial, social, and political power to a very select few. They're mostly men. They're almost universally white and Western. And so these things are also not attentive to the ways in which we are looking down the existential threat of climate change. So the latest assessment of the IPCC warns that every increment of warming results in a rapidly escalating hazards. More intense heat waves, heavier rainfall, and other weather extremes further increase risk for human health and ecosystems. In every region, people are dying from extreme heat. Climate-driven food and water insecurity is expected to increase with increased warming. When the risks combined with other adverse events, such as pandemics or conflicts, they'll become even more difficult to manage. And so we already see this in terms of the waste of resources when it comes to these large models. Some estimates by folks like Sashi Lucioni have estimated that to charge your phone fully, for every 2 images you generate with a large text to image model, it's like charging your phone fully. The models are, and these are, mind you, not models like Beth was generating with GANs, because those are much smaller models, but modern models that are estimated from large diffusion models that are owned by OpenAI and Midjourney. So these models are also water hogs. So 500 milliliters of water, 2 cups are consumed for every 5 to 50 prompts ChatGPT generates a response to. And these wastes of resources are already directly impinging on climate crisis mitigation goals. So the Washington Post reported in 2024 that coal-powered electricity plants in West Virginia, slated to be taken offline, are instead being kept running to feed the demand for data centers of Virginia. The companies have already blown past their climate goals. They've effectively said that Microsoft said that it was 30% off baseline, while Google's energy consumption was 48% higher. And this quote from Microsoft President Brad Smith is very indicative. He told Bloomberg, in 2020, we unveiled what we called our carbon moonshot. That was before the explosion in artificial intelligence. So in many ways, the moon is 5 times as far away as it was in 2020. And if you just think of our own forecast for the expansion of AI and its electrical needs. But if your goalposts are continuing to shift, then, in the moon with it, why have goalposts at all? So I want to end with that kind of dark assessment and thinking about the AI bubble and thinking about what happens when it bursts. And so what kind of residue will the AI bubbles popping leave behind? We're already kind of seeing the bubble inflate, and start to deflate. The banking investment giant Goldman Sachs estimated in early 2023 that 2/3 of jobs would be exposed to automation, with 18% of global work outright replaced by it. But by June 2024, it was saying that the technology is nowhere where it needs to be to replace jobs at that rate. David Kahn at VC giant Sequoia Capital wrote in June 2024 that AI firms need to turn something like $600 billion in revenue for the AI bet to pay off. So in a piece, Cory Doctorow wrote, "What kind of bubble is AI?" And he wrote that what we're going to be left with at the end of the day might be some smaller models of better scoped tasks. And if that's all we're left with, we'll be better. I mean, I think we'd welcome that. Just ones that are, and we can talk about that a little bit in the Q&A, especially models that have local control. But we're frankly more pessimistic about what'll be left in the space, namely on the climate and what that pushes. Data centers in particular. There was a story in a local Northern Virginia publication in which a data center was being built on Black and Indigenous bodies over a graveyard for formerly enslaved people, free Black people, and Indigenous Americans also buried there. And we're already seeing this deflate with DeepSeek. The book was written before DeepSeek came out, but we're seeing that, especially with the massive destruction of wealth happening with DeepSeek undermining NVIDIA's dominance in GPU production. We'll also see not only the material infrastructure and climate catastrophe, but also the industries that this technology has wrecked. The visual and conceptual artists who have been completely wrecked in their industry, folks like Carla Ortiz and Kelly McFerrin have talked about, and Sarah Anderson have talked about the ways in which work is very hard to get for designers. Jobs that Mira Murati, OpenAI CTO, remarked once that those jobs maybe shouldn't have been there in the first place. So we have that in our wake. Where do those careers go? Are those careers going to come back? But this hype cycle will end at one point. And one of the things that we can start to do to end on a happy note is think about the ways that we can insulate ourselves from hype in the future, what are the ways that we can educate ourselves, point it out, and try to identify what kind of perniciousness lies in these technologies. I'll leave it there because I'm a little over time, but thank you.
Okay, thank you to both. The plan here is for me to try and draw a few connections between these two speakers and ask them to reflect on a few points that I'm drawing out, and then we will open it up to the folks in the room. And if you're on Zoom, you're free to put some questions in the Q&A, and I will get to them and try and summarize them as I can as we go. So I'm going to just draw out one or 2 points, and we'll discuss before we get some audience input here. The first one is about power, because that is a theme that's running through both. Who has the power to control these models, to build them, to control the data that, as Dr. Hanna said, could be used for any purpose that they want, and towards what purpose? Who then bears the brunt of the harms that come from these models? So the environmental harms, we know that's not equally distributed. Who is being targeted by facial recognition? So both who has the power and then who is harmed by it. And the question that I have is it possible to shift the locus of power with these models? Not necessarily in who has power in society. We know that that is very hard to shift, but we are seeing a shift in the locus of AI power. DeepSeek is a good example, as it's taking away kind of the funding from a lot of these, but we see Hugging Face as an open source platform producing a lot of models. We see Plios in France producing a lot of really interesting open source models. Mistral in France is doing some interesting work here. We see the Allen Institute of AI producing some very powerful open source models. And so one of the things that I think OpenAI is starting to kind of figure out and get a little bit scared of is these models are just as powerful in terms of a lot of the benchmarks OpenAI is meeting at. So the question to both of you, is there a way to have us in academia support decentralization? Is that a solution, or is this a bargain that we don't want to make, kind of a Faustian bargain where we are inadvertently upholding these kind of power structures and we want to just avoid it completely? I don't know who wants to go first.
Go ahead.
Right, so great question, getting at kind of nexus of this. So who has the power and who bears the brunt of the harms? I mean, I think we're having, it seems like it's seeing who is serving, who is feeling the brunt of these harms, I think is becoming more and more clear. I mean, who is already being super exposed? I mean, there's multiple kind of registers of thinking about harms. Who's being exposed to automation in terms of their work? At the who is more likely to have their life chances automated, right? Whether that's credit scoring systems or um, those in poverty and those who are on at the receiving end of punitive actions from the criminal justice system. I mean, these are the kinds of places in which we're seeing, and we know that those harms are going to be bad. There's been the great work of folks like Virginia Eubanks talking about this, especially in the public sphere. And I think the thing that is newish, at least, in talking about generative AI in particular, is talking about who's subject to automation in in the way that affects life chances. And so in the book, we talk a little bit about the Luddites as a kind of way of interrogating automation as a means of thinking about understanding what automation is and knowing how that is reducing livelihoods. The Luddites, for folks who are unfamiliar, group of garment workers and in kind of early 17th century and 18th century England who had been opposing the water-powered looms that could automate garment and fabric production very quickly. And so very much this kind of element of the Industrial Revolution coming down on them. And so the Luddites, led by someone apocryphal named Ned Ludd, would go into these factories, smash the machines, leave the others alone, and only sign on the door Ned Ludd. And so the automotive portion of that, I think, is the one that's most stark. I mean, the elements in this talk I highlighted a little more was those who are more susceptible to climate harms. So can we shift power? I guess that's the question here. And I suppose the question is, there's a certain way in which these models can be useful and for certain tasks and for certain things. And if they're in places in which those who are impacted can have direction under not only who is using them, but also where they're getting their data, whether those are small enough to mitigate the climate harms. Something we didn't really talk about was the way that the data to even train these are basically any kind of data on the internet that isn't tied down. There are multiple lawsuits by artists, writers, authors on training of these training these things basically, and their how they're running afoul of copyright. Now, copyright shouldn't be the final be-all referent of it, but it is a way of saying, it is kind of the only tool that artists have to say, this is the product of my intellectual labor, you shouldn't be training things on this. So does it shift power in the way that we'd want it to, insofar as devaluing, saying, OpenAI, or saying we can have general purpose models? I would say probably not, because anything that's going to challenge that has to look like a general purpose model. And it requires some kind of data centralization, even if it may not include or require so much compute. It does still require that. But I would say that there are ways in which having alternatives is very interesting, very necessary to explore. That was a little rambly. I'm sorry.
Okay, so I want to pick that up where Alex left it with general purpose technology. I think it's really important that we make some distinctions in terms of, let's say where we are now with LLMs and that use, let's code that as general purpose. Any one of us can type in a question about any topic, supposedly. And that the strongest models are natively trained in English, except for the ones in China. Like, that's its own space. So I would suggest, in terms of genealogies of power, when we look at things like Clearview, when we look at the application of adding automation to surveillance technologies, and the pattern is the people who have historically been most surveilled, the poor, et cetera, will continue to be the most surveilled. That seems incontestable, to the point that in the top of the pyramid of the EU AI Act, what's forbidden in terms of using advanced automation is things around surveillance and refugee communities, things around manipulation, and like there's a list of things. It's forbidden because it's been demonstrated way in advance of advanced automation that states and military extensions and policing have historically demonstrated levels of abuse and violence that the technology just accelerates. So that's encoded into law, at least in the EU, because it's demonstrable. Whether or not it's supported, I mean, I can't even talk about what's going on with deportations in the United States, so I'm not going to. So let's say there's recognition of systemic abuses of surveillance technologies and, data enhancements, so people's lives really are controlled outside of prison in ways that historically they have been controlled inside of prisons. That shift, I don't know, maybe there's a way in which some aspects of regulation can be helpful. I mean, it's not going to be helpful in the US at the moment because that is off the table. But that is one kind of traditional avenue in terms of how can this be addressed. In Canada, it was deemed irregular for Clearview to be used on populations. It was an illegal technology, or it was illegal for Canada in terms of PIPEDA and the Privacy Act, and it was used inappropriately by the Canadian Mounted Police. So those are helpful, even though they're always slow and they're often not enough, and they're also not in good time to support communities and individuals who actually are being, taken advantage of in these contexts. But the other side of it, in terms of general purpose technology and what is now moving into markets, whether the power can be shifted, I think that you make a good point, and that the stock market went so crazy that DeepSeek really did unnerve what had very quickly been established as a status quo. It must take X amount of data, X amount of power, X amount of secrecy, and then, unless you're Meta, which it would be really ironic if Meta ends up being like the good
open
guys
source
by
version,
mistake, but
that's
you're
right.
like, I don't know. So that open source is necessarily a greater good. It's a greater good if there's no actual X risk, no PDOOM, then maybe that kind of distribution. And I do think, like, in the conversation around, so what could be a good outcome? It is, everyone or communities or universities or businesses, like there's a bespoke model that is tuned to support the work that you're doing. And then you actually can use, this machine learning capacity to do research. The highest bar we have right now is like, it cures cancer. And Yeah, I mean, I find it really interesting to see what is going on in terms of just the pure science avenue where you have like whatever it is, protein folding and, you know,
Medical imaging to identify
yeah,
tumors.
it's really interesting. And it's interesting that synthetic data, like it doesn't have to be data from the world for it to be productive. I need to understand more. I talked to, I was talking to somebody about protein folding, and they're like, yeah, none of those things really can exist outside of the most like extreme conditions of like what it needs for refrigeration. Like that's, it's not really viable. It's hype. So I was like, okay, I need to look at this some more. But so there, it does look like there could be some disruptive opportunities where it's not just like the main four, and that's what it will be in perpetuity. But markets have not been in the favor of, you know, distribution of information and power. And the UK bringing Anthropic in as their house tech team to automate and help the people of the UK in terms of public services, whatever's going on with the United States administration and OpenAI. I think OpenAI now has like an office. I'm kidding, but it feels like they have an
They probably have an
office.
office.
They also they just partnered with Oxford too, so they're getting
Mhm.
tentacles in the UK as well.
Mhm.
Right. So it's, I don't know, like maybe.
Yeah, 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 yeah. I want to move just a little bit to the micro away from these macro questions of power, because I'm inspired by this idea of using AI as the other, getting it to be more wild, which you quote a lot in your book, Dr. Coleman, and like thinking about, as Dr. Hanna talks a lot about in your book, the kind of like all of these outputs in generative AI just kind of go to the median, most gentle, most like puppy dog outputs in some cases. But it's terrible for like facial recognition for crimes. But in terms of just like everyday interacting with it, it's pretty non-controversial. But Dr. Coleman, you said, well, let's make it controversial. Let's train it on Afrofuturism or Afro-pessimism and see what comes out. And so in terms of the micro, we have students who use these tools as a study partner, et cetera. What is the kind of potential of really pushing back against the big four, the standard uses of it? Is there a blooming of creativity that we might see akin to after photography kind of allowed modern art to come out? Like, we as students, as faculty, can we really be pushing the boundaries of these tools? And for both of you, Oregon, and I'm expecting Dr. Hanna to maybe say, no, this is too much of a Faustian bargain, but like, can we just be a little bit hopeful and excited about just for our own use and thinking about how it may expand our own minds if we treat it as the other and not as what it's kind of forced on us from some of these big general purpose LLMs?
I think it's whether you think we got the internet or whether you think we got social networks. Because when we got the internet, well, for one thing, it wasn't delivered to us by Google. You know, people made it. Like you had military infrastructure and background, and then you had a bunch of physicists, but then you had people like showing up and nerding out and building some text they could communicate better. And I'm not pretending like, oh, and life was so great. There was a lot of, but life was not the same thing as like everything being reduced to kind of like a terrible moment on TikTok where because of one thing, you're then served, you know, all of these other pieces of content that help to persuade you that really, you know, like white supremacy is the way to go or whatever the thing is. So is it more like one or the other? Because the thing is, I don't think that the New York Times is going to win the case against OpenAI. And I think the precedent in terms of Google having won a similar type of case in the Supreme Court against Oracle in terms of fair use, because search is not using the data, it's essentially training on it. And that is the same with what OpenAI will claim as well. We're not using the data, we're just training on it. So that's a conversation that we can have in terms of what about copyright and IP will be preserved moving forward. But the other side of it of, okay, let's step away from that and think, what is creative and inventive use here? And some of this you've talked about with in terms of your students who are using some of this stuff well, they're using it well. There's certain things that you can just dial it up, dial it down to test out the situation and reflect something back. It's not good if it's just purely ChatGPT. We all know that. It's bad if, like, the one thing that you tell students is you have to read it, because if you just hand this in, it's terrible. Like,
You have to read the output from.
yeah, no, I was like,
ChatGPT.
no,
Yeah.
I'll kill myself. But I mean, in some ways, like talking to artists about this, in some ways, it's a first new technology that does not have a particular formal style. Like if you talk about synthesizers in music, or if you talk about, I mean, you can talk about impressionism, and you could talk about different styles of painting, and I guess they're all using like oil paint, so that's not a different medium. But the way in which like there's a framing of this is part of the material difference of using this new technique. It's not clear that we have that with how generative AI is designed, which is, I think, one of the reasons why you get so much just middle of the road, like
Mediocre.
bad stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. All right, final thoughts from up here, and then I will turn it over to the audience after this.
I
Thank you
mean,
for your patience.
yeah, I mean, I'll say my most provocative thing first, and then I'll explain it. So, I don't think students should be using this. I mean, I generally think that for the grounds to be laid for this to be something that I think people could use, and even this framing is probably one I'm tentative about. There would have to be kind of owning kind of the means of computation on data that was consentfully provided for training, which many people who are cultural producers don't have the ability to meaningfully opt out of, even with their publishers. Every news organization other than the New York Times. And I actually think that the New York Times is going to have a good case. Reuters recently won a case against a smaller company on copyright. It was a very small company though, and so there's the big cases are against OpenAI, and Midjourney and DeviantArt and kind of larger providers. In environmentally sustainable computational situations, um, for output of purposes which you do not have to rely on correctness, or you can verify that correctness from an expert perspective, right? And so in some ways you need the background conditions to be radically different for the technology to be used in a way that we consider, like, I guess ethical. I don't like to use the term ethical because I'm not a philosopher. I don't really know what that means. But like within the bounds of acceptability. So I will say that much. Um, that said, there's, like, I don't want to come across as someone that's like completely against, say, like neural architectures. Like there are actually some very interesting kinds of uses of these, especially when it comes to, say, uses in which the data and the compute have sovereignty. And so we were talking for dinner last night about uses from organizations like Teheku Media, who are producing um, language technology, notably machine translation and automatic speech recognition that works for Terrio Maori. And they own the data and who can use the data and who can train on the data, as well as, I guess they don't own the servers, which is a problem. But at least own the data and kind of uses of those data and have that buy-in. There's other projects on data sovereignty that focus on who's owning the data and also who owns the compute. And so those are situations which I think, certain kinds of neural architectures and technology that, I mean, we probably wouldn't call generative AI in the same way, are very promising. And I think those, I mean, and I would say as humanists, it's really interesting to explore what those situations would be and kind of think about what are those ways in which control can be wrested back. Um, I had one more thing to say, but I forgot what it is. So
It'll come up again. Okay, so we have a mic going around, and I'm going to check in on the Q&A on the online, but anyone in the room? We have a few. Yeah.
I wanted to ask about low resource and high resource languages and how that contributes to the homogenization of knowledge. And we know about new technologies that are emerging in terms of meta seamless M4T speech to speech, which kind of addresses the kind of the inequalities in terms of more spoken languages. But I was wondering if you think there is a way where users can, I know we can't correct it, it's part of the economy of big data, but are there ways in which users can help at least kind of mitigate that imbalance so that we can reshape kind of the way knowledge is produced through these tools?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's a really rich question. I had this conversation with 3 computer scientists, all of whom were coming from different locations. One from Seoul, from South Korea, one from India, and one from the US. And they were all, one was a university researcher and the other 2 were working for major technology companies. And the question was, why can't we have multilingual, natively multilingual models? And the scientists who had built one, and I think it might be the only foundation model that's multilingual natively, talked about the incredible hard work to get a level of parity with low resource languages so it could be built in a way that's worked well in the sense of how do these models work well, if you think they work well. I'm not sure everyone thinks they work well, but so you have that kind of parity. So it was resources and will and building an international research group so people would pull video, make recordings, interview people, like build the data up in the way that, I mean, you're talking about how can people help contribute to that. The one from India was talking about, it looks like we're about to have what might be the first like national foundation model, or maybe, I don't know if people mind that term. So because like Microsoft and a company in India are collaborating and, there's will and interest in building one that is locally derived, like coming out of India. And I don't know how many of the languages that are spoken in India will be represented in that model, like what their thoughts are on, okay, so it's going to be a natively multilingual model. And then the scientist in Seoul was saying, well, I don't so much have a problem with majority culture, majority language. It is people speaking other languages who are working in this context where there's deficit. And often it comes up where there's a question of emergency. Like you don't have time to do a translation, like you're at a hospital or there's an emergency and you got to find the nurse who knows that language, then talk to the, etc. So across them all, there's the question of how is it valued? And for groups that need to, there needs to be a reason to incorporate certain languages because there's a monetary value in terms of that user group. That's traditionally how it's been done. That's a lever, but thinking about like an Indian national model, I'm trying to understand, is that better? is that an improvement over what we have in the world, where instead of getting your model from China or getting it from Google, like, is it better to have a national model? Because the way that we've seen some of these technologies played out, let's think about like national digital ID in India, that has not been a panacea. It has actually, the argument has been, it really has reified hierarchies of, value and disvalue. So yes, there are ways, there are methods to make the multilingual models, but the levers that have to be pulled in terms of moving that forward, they need to be, I don't know, I think looked at with some clear-eyed views.
I would also say, yeah, I think that Beth's comments are I agree with a lot of what she's saying. One of the things I would add is that thinking about users, I I mean, users is such a, I'm like stealing from Ruha Benjamin where you're saying like where she says if we use, they call us users because you get used, so I don't I'm gonna like so I want to move maybe like people who are consumers of the, it's not like that's a better term, but like people who are interacting with the model. And one of the things that I'm thinking about is what do people know, like how are people going to reap benefits of models downstream? So like there are projects, for instance, I remember when I was at Google, there's a project called Crowdsource where people would take pictures of kind of like other situations or other actions and tag them. So it could be trained on like a more inclusive number of images. And so their example was like a wedding. So they'd have, examples like take a picture of like an Indian wedding. But like, okay, are people going to reap the benefits of that, or are you just kind of volunteering data for a huge corporation? And so there's sort of like this is a discussion that also happens in accessibility often, which is like, well, am I just going to volunteer like giving all this data for you to like do product development? Well, like, no, like you're going to reap, like you're going to advertise this and you say now our product can do XYZ, right? And so I think in any of that kind of discussion of what users can do, especially like low resource languages, is it, you know, why should someone be committed to be dedicating their time unless this is going to be something that kind of gives back to a particular community? Um, and Beth is exactly right. Producing these data are very, very laborious. You have to, if you want to do it right or to have enough data, and even having people who are annotators or speakers who, I'm involved in a few projects at DARE where, we have people who we pay for, to read sentences. And that's, like, and that's hard work, and it is labor, and it gets crystallized in the model because then it has to, and that is slow, painstaking work to do. And then who gets the control and reap the fruits of that? I mean, it's the most kind of pressing question.
Well, this centers on power. Yeah, we'll go here and then here. Thanks. Sorry, I don't know people's names here. Sorry to be pointing.
Hi. So first of all, thank you for two really insightful papers. I have a question for both of you, linked questions, and it's really something I've been struggling with. So I'm hoping that you can help me think through some of these challenges. And first, Beth, when you were talking about the politics of freedom in terms of certain understandings of liberalism, what kept coming to mind is the ways in which we seem to be moving completely away from liberalism. So that it's the freedom that's linked to something that's entirely illiberal. Like, so you can think of the Sauron in Silicon Valley, who, has recently proclaimed for many times that democracy and freedom are not aligned, and that democracy in the U.S. went south It was destroyed as soon as women got the vote. And so given that, how can we think through not only freedom with this twinning of illiberalism, but the ways in which the rights or the far right seems to be taking up terms like civil rights. The attack of universities right now is being done in the name of civil rights. To what extent do you think the surround is also being appropriated? And then I kept thinking about the ways in which what people are talking about now in terms of energy is nuclear. So the way we get away from the linking between AI and global climate change is to think nuclear, literally, and I think you're pointing to many things. But I was wondering if you can take us through that in the ways in which the addressing of some environmental concerns seems to lead to other sorts of ruin, because I think it fits with your question of what remains after.
Thanks, Wendy. The nuclear thing, it was pointed out to me by people who are working on environmental issues that nuclear is not an alt, it's a plus up. So the rest of the stuff is not necessarily going away. It's just additive. So I will leave that to Alex. But I was like, oh, so there's not one better thing about that. But I believe that to Alex. Yes. When I was speculating in 2009 on this kind of agentic positionality that is not identity based, but more of how a technique, a techne, and in this case, race. And then I'm coming back to technology of the surround in 2022 and use the figure of the maroon, use the figure of escaping away from the fort. Really powerful language that both brings in lived histories and experiences, but also the kind of leaps of imagination, the metaphors that allow us to work differently. And also my absolute fascination with, wow, reinforcement learning could be kind of magical, even though I don't know what it means to reward or punish a system. You're like, I mean, I know some of it is like human language trying to describe processes, but it's still the language in any case. I mean, I've asked machine learning computer scientists, I was like, do you really think neural nets are like human brains? And they go, yeah, maybe. So I'm like, okay. But let me not tarry too long and just get to it. Yeah, it seems to me that some avenues of freedom are not avenues of freedom, because it seems to me that the language, if not the intention, coincides too well with exactly the type of citation that you bring up, which is why, absurdly, I'm now talking about, well, in a post-regulatory environment, how do we have some ability to regulate? What would that look like? And it's interesting to me, like, I don't see other people creating, models for constitutional AI, like we're going to get good AIs to watch other AIs. And I mean, this was inevitable, like turtles all the way down. It's just going to be like stats and stacks of AIs, like watching each other, and who do we trust? Like, so the answer is, I unfortunately even though I like the pieces that I made and I like Octavia Butler, it's not clear to me that that language of the surrounds is escaping capture.
Yeah. Um, Speaking to the to nuclear, it's actually when you hear like Sam Altman talks about nuclear, he was like he in a recent interview he's just asserted we're going to have fusion. He's like fusion's going to happen, and you're like, well, what, like how? And anybody involved in fusion is like, we're nowhere close to like net positive energy fusion. You know, that's not a technology that exists, and it's I mean it's very yeah, there's kind of a politics of assertion there. Like, if we just assert this so much, I mean, it's a very Silicon Valley mindset. Um, and so, you know, getting to nuclear, and then there's, I mean, kind of a network of like micro nuclear startups, and I don't know enough about the industry to speak authoritatively or really informationally on that. Oops, sorry. But I would say that, I mean, the kind of right now it's sort of the gold rush is such that the easiest way there is by, you know, spinning up infrastructure that already exists. So the coal-fired power plants, the starting back up of 3 Mile Island is happening now too. Effectively, these energy projects, which are had been decommissioned, are now back online. So climate goals that had been set out, and especially now under the Trump administration, is kind of completely just blowing through. And so, yeah, in the case, and the way I think of it is, you know, if there was going to be nuclear as a means of thinking of a transition, that would have been one politic. But these are nuclear, as Beth said, in addition to coal, to natural gas, all these infrastructure projects that already exist. You didn't talk about the last thing you said, Wendy, in terms of environmental concerns and ways to ruin. I mean, this is what's happening with lithium. This is what's happening with cobalt. This is what's happening with PFAS. I mean, these technologies that are supposed to be in environmental, you know, in electric vehicles, are leading to massive lithium extraction, you know, in Chile, in the salt flats in Nevada. I mean, these are supposed to be, and these are, you know, less necessarily about what AI is doing, but I mean, this kind of techno environmental future, right? And I mean, that is very much on the table.
Yeah, we'll go here. And there was a question online that you can address later about whether the AI Action Summit talked at all about environmental concerns. So just keep that in your back of mind.
Yeah, that's a short answer.
Oh,
No,
no?
there were side events.
Okay, thanks. That was not one.
Thank you for your talks. That was really inspiring. I think I'm here trying to maybe seek some advice, especially thinking about like the environmental impacts that you mentioned. It's hard for me to think about whether there is a good use of AI, but in academia and in research, we continue to sort of use these tools in the processes of how do we make, or like, how do we make this better, or how do we potentially lower the barriers of access to AI, or how do we mitigate the risks and the impacts? But that also seems like AI being used in academia seems inherently very colonial to me. So I was wondering how you two sort of orient yourselves in your research in terms of this, I guess, dealing with the colonial aspect of academia and using AI to, in attempts to make it better, but that kind of feeding into, yeah, the cycle of AI use. I don't know if that makes a lot of sense.
I'm just going to add on to that because there was a question online that was very similar. So I'm just going to bring it into the conversation. Should we be trying to divest completely from AI? And is that a reachable goal? Or is the future work shaping it to be better for more people and the environment? So I think it's in the same spirits.
It's not clear to me that large models are the only paradigm. And it's also not clear to me that in certain research environments, I mean, a lot of people, a lot of researchers are using ChatGPT on the side. But in terms of when you're designing a system and you're doing research on global warming and you're modeling things, and I actually think it was Wendy who brought that up some years ago, that this was a really interesting instance in terms of where modeling is quite productive. It doesn't all have to be OpenAI, and in fact, in customized systems, it can't be OpenAI. So this idea that we need these giant models, and Meta has a new data center that's the size of Kansas or something. I don't know. Like the scales, like for what? What is it for? And I am not suggesting that I'm a super fan of the CEO of Microsoft, but he said, what does AI do? Have we seen a 10% increase in the bottom line in terms of productivity in the United States? No, we have not. So show me what it does. What does it do? It helps 11-year-olds do their homework. Like it helps you write email. Like that's not really a thing. So I think that Alex has given us, power to resist hype and to ask fundamentally, what is this giant model for? It's okay to ask that in terms of where can we see things that are interesting and productive. I myself don't feel like we ever resist making new technologies. And I think there are reasons for this, but kind of like feminist refusal of AI, I think you can refuse, but in a context in which extraction and application, all these things are grist for the mill, I'm not really sure. I think it would be worthwhile to marshal refusals around particular things, such as maybe we shouldn't use ChatGPT.
Yeah, I mean, thank you for being very kind and suggesting the tools for resisting hype, which is what we certainly try to do. Talking about academia, I mean, it's sort of like it's about who has the stakes to the university, right? I mean, what's it being forced on people in the university for, right? Here's an example. At Cal State University, I live in California, the largest university system in the US, just by students, number of students alone, they had a huge contract, and said they were going to be like an AI first system. The faculty pushed back. Cal Faculty Association said, we don't want this. We are not consulted in this. We don't have a reason. What is this going to be used for? We're not involved in this. So, I mean, yes, in the book, we say ridicule as praxis, as on an individual level, but as a collective, I mean, the most effective, and I'm borrowing from a great Canadian scholar, Blair Attar-Frost, who says, like, what are examples of AI counter-governance? And one of those examples are labor unions, are organizations that have said, no, this is something we don't have control over. Why do we need this in the workplace? What does this do for us? And again, I don't want to reject modeling out of hand to speak to climate modeling and whatnot. Modeling with kind of specified outputs and inputs that make sense is great. I've written models myself. Have a whole dissertation on, that developed a language model. But having these things that is this kind of toy or this thing that Satya Nadella doesn't know what it's for, is being told that is the greatest thing since Taylorist factories, but is not producing 10% of value, then yeah, then why do we need it?
Okay, I'm going to respect our time, so I'll just read out a few questions, and then I just want to leave 2 minutes at the end for people to network and come up if they want. There was some questions online about defining intelligence and the politics of intelligence, the context of what intelligence mean, and the difference in particular of an ImageNet classifier versus machine intelligence. And then just inviting us all to think about what companies, governments, and citizens of varying nations, and I would also say university people, can do to think about how to make AI use benefit for humanity rather than a powerful weapon to destroy humanity. So what can we put in place there? But I want to thank the sponsors, the Public Humanities Hub, the Center for Computational Social Science, and all the other co-sponsors, and especially to our speakers for coming so far to invite us into this conversation and thinking about how we can use humanities perspectives and social science perspectives, theories, methods to get a handle on what's going on in the world today. So thank you so much.
Thank you.